Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Widening Your Aperture podcast. And I am here with Bonney. Anne, hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's good to have you here. So tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
I'm Anne Bonney. I'm a motivational speaker, and I'm one of those weirdos who likes change. I've gone through a lot of it. I've moved 28 times to 4 different continents. I've had 6 distinct careers, and God only knows how many hairdos. So change has kind of been my jam. And so when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do as a motivational speaker, it was one day in the shower. I said, well, Anne, your thing is change. Like, it's what you do. It's what you know. And so 8 years ago, I left all the corporate stuff behind and decided to branch out on my own and started a little podcast myself. So that one's called Dancing in the Discomfort Zone, because I feel like that's what we do when we're dealing with change.
Yes, absolutely. And I was telling you before we jumped on here that you're my first podcast host as a guest. So this is like a new frontier for me, because normally everybody's like, I've never done this before. And they're all like, you can see like deer in the headlights, and you're completely comfortable. You're like, this is my zone.
Halfway through this, I'm going to start asking you the questions.
Role reversal for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Wait a minute, whose podcast is this again?
Yeah. So I love the topic, because I think that change is one of those things that is so hard for some people and so easy for others, but change is something that we are always in conversation with. There's never a point in our lives where we're not going through or facing an impending change in our lives, because that's the only constant.
Yeah, so, and even if it's little stuff like what you expected to happen doesn't happen, like all of this counts as change. So it happens all the time.
All the time. And I like how you kind of separate, and at least I read your book, and I like how you kind of separate the two between change that we have chosen to bring upon ourselves versus change that we had no control. It just happened.
We bring it upon ourselves.
Yes.
Because it's what it feels like sometimes. But yeah, totally.
Yeah.
They're totally different reactions that we have.
Yes. And probably 2 totally different ways that we maybe navigate through them, although I'm sure there's some similarities. So let's talk about change.
All right, let's dance.
Okay. So change, as we talked about, kind of comes in many forms. When you look at that, what does that mean for you?
Well, I always think about, dealing with change that we bring upon ourselves isn't as hard. It's easier to revert back to the old way, but it's not quite as emotionally challenging because we have that internal motivation. So I like to focus on the change that we don't pick or that didn't go the way we wanted to. And we find ourselves, I joke about being on the porch of our old comfort zone and we can't get back in, and we really want to get back in, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, how do we shift our attention away from banging on the door to get back in and look at what our options are? That's the hard part, is kind of leaving that behind and saying, all right, cool, I'm going to move forward. So that's the dancing in the discomfort zone that I like to dance in. And some of the research that I saw at the University of Michigan talked about how when we exercise our ability to deal with uncomfortable things in areas where we can control them, we get better at dealing with the uncomfortable things that we can't control. Yeah. And so that's always something that I like to talk about is, I do some marathons. I went up Kilimanjaro last year. I'm doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat in a couple of weeks.
Wow, lady.
I know, right?
Talk about pushing the discomfort zone.
It's these uncomfortable things that I'm seeking out so that when life hands me a bowl of chicken poop, like a pandemic or something like that, I'm more equipped to deal with it. And this is something that, the comfort crisis is a real thing. As the world achieves more technological advances and with things get more comfy and easier, we get softer and it's harder to deal with all of this stuff. So I always like to kind of start there.
Yeah.
Because it makes us stronger.
I'm interested too, when you talk about the comfort crisis, because I was actually just doing a little series on Sam Harris's meditation app about this, that things have gotten so comfortable for us that even in the most mundane, run-of-the-mill daily situations that we come into, nobody knows how to function anymore, like having a conversation with a stranger or talking to somebody that you maybe don't know that well at work, but you want to get to know them. we find it hard to, it's like, can I text you? Can I text you what I want to say?
Can we be friends?
I mean, almost back to the days of like writing notes and leaving them in places for people, but I completely see exactly what this means. And I think, so when you talk about like being able to navigate changes that you are in control of, gives you a better ability to control the ones that don't. Is that when we're talking like resilience?
Not control them. You can't control them, but you can deal with them better. And yeah, that does develop that resilience. It develops that ability and that belief that I can do something to make this better. It's that hopelessness that makes us feel like a constant victim of change. And we're just riding the wrecking ball around our lives, just watching everything get destroyed. Whereas when you have that resilience and you have that belief in yourself and have that catalog of things you've survived before that you can call on, it makes the discomforts of change that we don't control a little bit easier.
Yeah, that totally makes it. It's like you almost build a self-trust in yourself and in your capabilities, knowing like, I've made it through this. I've made it through other hard things. I know that I don't see it right now, but I know that the path, that at least one step of the path is going to become clear. And I know that I can make it through this. Like, I can do this.
Yeah. And it's interesting. What you just said is so important for us to say to ourselves. I was just reading something by Dr. James P. Gills Jr. He was a 6-time double Ironman finisher. Okay. So that's not just one iron distance triathlon. It's 2. So that's 5 miles of swimming, 240 miles of biking, and 52 miles of running all in a row.
Is that even human?
6 times. Anyway, he said he learned to talk to himself rather than listening to himself. And the conversation that you just had, I remember the things I've overcome. I remember the things I've figured out. I am kind of a badass, is a conversation we need to have with ourselves, because that voice of doubt in our head is just constant, like constantly going. And it knows too much. It knows everything we've messed up, and it's going to bring it all up, right? When we're trying to get the courage to do this thing. Yes. And so what you just said of saying, hey, I've survived this stuff, I've done this stuff, I've overcome this stuff, I can do this too, is an important conversation we need to have with ourselves in those moments.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important to keep almost like a track record of your wins. And the smallest wins are the ones to me that I think matter the most a lot of the time. It's, of course, you get to this big grand finale and it's like, oh, I've changed and I'm past the threshold. But it's like the small wins along the way. That's what carried you through to that final finish line.
Yeah. And I think it's important to keep that list of not just the big things, but the little things, because you're right. It is those little day-to-day things that we make it through, that we get over, that does continue to build that little resilience on the day-to-day for those things that you're like, why does this bother me so much? Like, it shouldn't be that big a deal, but it is. It's those little things that are going to get you through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why is it that us humans have such a resistance to change? Because I think there's people like you that are like, change, bring it on. And then there's people who even like one blurb of the word change, anything, and they're like, it's like down into the hole.
Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning of my keynotes, I ask people what their change tolerance is. And if it's a small enough room where I can see everybody, I ask them to hold up a 1 for I hate it and a 5 for I love it. And there's always somebody in the back, like holding up, no fingers, like, I hate it. I don't want to.
Thumbs down.
Yeah, exactly. Thumb down. No, I'm out. And I think even those of us with a 5, it's really kind of a learned behavior because our brain is built to protect us from danger. And any unknown is danger. We have no idea what's going to happen, so we might not survive. And so our brain, the reactive part, the lizard part of our brain that wants to keep us alive, which is really awesome, is scared of things we haven't survived before. Mm-hmm. So you get that stress response, you get that voice of doubt starting to tell you what's going to go wrong, which is basically your brain trying to keep you alive. Hey, look, we haven't done this before. We might not survive. Let's just not. Okay. You know, and that little piece of your brain,
good.
100% risk averse. It doesn't know all the things you've figured out and all the things that you put in place and all the things you've thought about. No. It just wants to keep you safe.
Yes.
And that's why it can be super hard, especially when people don't have that list of things they've experienced and overcome and accomplished to fall back on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's like our brain is like a pattern seeking missile. And it's like, anytime you divert from the pattern, your amygdala starts to be like, oh, no, let's hold off here. And it can be sometimes it's simple changes. It's really simple changes to diet, to exercise, that are just like little things that we want to do to tweak in our life, compared to like sometimes the mass scale changes, like a pandemic, like losing a family member, going through losing a friendship. Like those are some big, massive scale changes that have to happen. But even just the tiny ones sometimes can be so daunting. So how do you actually embark upon that? Like what would be kind of like the steps that you would give somebody in saying, whether this is maybe a small change or this is something on a bigger scale? The starting points may be very different. It's meet yourself where you are. But what would kind of be the first step you'd look at?
Well, I think that what you just said is the perfect first step. It's meet yourself where you are. What's your problem is the way I put it in a book. And I don't mean like, what's the problem I need to solve? Okay, I lost my job. I need to go find another job. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What's your problem? Why do you have a problem with this? Because there's something about the way it used to be that you really like, or that you're used to, or you're comfortable with, right? So by stopping for a sec and saying, okay, what is my emotional challenge with this? Why am I upset? Why am I sad? Why am I angry? Why am I grieving? Why is this hard? You move the thinking from that, the amygdala that you talked about in that lizard brain, around to the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain with the logic. It's the part with, that kind of knows the things you've figured out, and knows what you've thought through, knows what has happened in the world before, and can sort of weigh those risks. So when you get out of that reaction part and into response and sort of intellectualizing the emotional response, you can start to say, I understand that. Perfect example. I recently quit drinking because alcohol does not, we just haven't done each other any favors. So we decided to just call it quits. But it's not just my own habits that are in the way. It's also social pressure and all this. And I'm dating. So do I put on my dating profile, I don't drink? There's a big identity thing there. So, and so I was having all of this resistance, and I'm like, but like, I know why I want to do this, which is your second step. But that first step is, why does this bother me so much? And it came down for me to this cool kid identity thing that, I developed when I was 15 years old, and I saw adults drinking and they were cool and sophisticated. Right. And so I feel like if I want to be cool and sophisticated, I have to have a martini. Right. And then I think about, like, follow that path down and go, wait a minute, when I have a martini, I'm anything but cool and sophisticated. Like, I'm a big dingbat. But that identity piece and that wanting to fit it in was at the base of this challenge. And so by thinking through that, I could say to myself, hey, okay, I understand you want to fit in, you want to belong, you want to be a part of the group, and you can do that without alcohol. Yeah. And so I had to kind of dig deep into the depths of this change I wanted to make and say, where's my resistance coming from? Now that helps reinforce my why, which is the second step, is what's the point? Why are you doing this? And when you're thinking through it and getting deeper into the problem and the emotional challenge with it, you start to kind of pair up your why with the logic behind the opposite of your emotional problem with it, so that you can let go of that emotional piece, shift your focus off of the porch of the comfort zone, and start thinking about what you're going to do.
That makes total sense. And it's interesting. Like, I can see like quitting alcohol as being almost like this double whammy of a change for people to make, because there's probably a lot of conditioning throughout your life from families. When we get together, we drink on the holidays. If it gets stressful in a family situation, everybody ends up going to the bar. All of these things that's like
hiding in the bathroom, drinking the little airplane bottles,
Exactly. And then there's also the societal acceptance around drinking. Like, that's how we socialize, is going out to have a couple drinks. And you're right. Like, on the dating sites, been there, done that too. It's like, nobody's asking to go get coffee. Nobody's asking to go get like a juice at the juice bar. It's always like, hey, do you want to go grab a cocktail? Do you want to grab a beer? Do you want to grab a glass of wine? Because it's so normalized.
Right.
So it's like, you're almost fighting two like levels of resistance there.
Yeah.
Oof. How's it going?
In so many changes that we make, you fight that. If you want to change your career, people are like, "Ooh, wow, but you've been accounting for years." And you're like, "Yeah, but I hate it." And they're like, "Yeah, but I mean, it's what you do." And you got,
it's safe.
If you want to leave a marriage, if you want to go back to school, you're always going to get that societal pressure, which makes it even more fun.
Oh, yes. Because now you're really the black sheep that doesn't belong, right?
Right. And this is where you have to surround yourself with the right sounding boards in those moments, right? I don't bring up, not drinking with my heavy drinking friends. Oftentimes I'll ask the bartender, hey, can you give me a soda with lime and make it look like an alcohol drink so my friend doesn't bug me? And the bartender's like, hell yeah, I got you, boo. And they take care of it,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's becoming more and more common. I've been to several bars now that have mocktails on their, on the menu, so that people who don't drink and don't want to be like looked at weird can just order a mocktail, and so they fit in without compromising themselves.
Well, and this is the key is as you're developing this understanding of what your point is, what's the point of that I'm doing this? What's my problem? What's my resistance? It also helps you to develop some of those strategies. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this with certain people. Okay, when I get to a restaurant, I'm going to order this. Okay, when I, whatever it is, I'm going to adapt my life around so that I can support this change that I'm choosing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But even if it's a change that you haven't chosen, you haven't put yourself forward for, it's important to think about what your challenge is with whatever's going on. What's your resistance? So maybe you're getting a new computer system at work and you just changed over from a different new computer system that didn't work. And so now you're going to have to go through the whole thing again. And it's a big pain in your butt. And stopping to identify, why do I have a challenge with this? What's my resistance? Well, I don't like it. I don't want to learn it. I don't know what I'm doing. By stopping and identifying all that stuff, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, I don't like this. And it's part of my job. I like this job other than this part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward.
Yeah. I love that. And I love what you talked about when you started with acknowledging the emotions. So like this change is going to come, whether it's elicited on our part or it just, shit hits the fan in life.
Yep.
It happens all the time.
All the time.
To sit back and be like, how do I really feel about this? Like, what are the feelings that are there? Because I think when you identify those, I think it does offer you the opportunity to kind of widen the aperture a little bit and say, what are some other possibilities here? Even though I feel this strong emotion, it's almost in a sense like cognitive reframing too, where it's like, okay, this sucks, but it's something that has to happen. But how can I look at this from a different perspective and that might be a little bit more positive, that brings maybe a different emotion than one that's more forward moving.
Right. And I think you bring up a perfect point of acknowledging those negative emotions. Again, we're fighting our social programming. Look on the bright side, be positive. Well, shit, I feel like crap right now. I don't feel like looking on the bright side. If you stop and actually acknowledge that, I don't like this. I'm scared I'm not going to be able to learn this new computer system. It's a pain in the butt. I don't want to do it. I don't want to sit in class. It's okay to have those negative emotions.
Yes.
This is the key. It's okay to have those. You're not going to walk into a business meeting and pound your fist on the desk and say, I don't like it. Okay, that's a
I mean, you could.
Yeah, you could. You can.
Probably not going to end well for you. But,
but by acknowledging them for yourself, you're able to move past them a lot better than trying to squash them down, because it's like squashing lava into a volcano. It only works for a short period of time.
Yes. Yes. If you just let them process. And I like how you say that. It's, I see this as the both and, which is something that I think a lot of people have lost the skill of, is it can both be this and this at the same time. Like, that's completely normal. So it can both suck, and I can figure out a way to embrace this change from a positive way that helps me to shift to get through this transition period.
Right. Because
very
if
possible.
we can only make the transition longer and more difficult by staying with resistance, especially when it's something that we have no control over. If it's something that we don't like at work, but it's happening, whether we like it or not, we can leave the job. But if we choose to stay with the job, okay, now what are we going to do to deal with this? And how are we gonna get through it? Because your day is the one that you're ruining by continuing to resist something that you can't control.
And speaking of that resistance, like I think that's a universal thing. Anybody that goes through change or is pushing themselves outside of a comfort zone. I know, like even Stephen Pressfield, he wrote the book The War of Art, and he talks about like the battle you have to fight is against resistance. So you have to show up every day and you have to sit your ass in that seat and you have to write. And it's almost the same kind of story when we face resistance and a change aspect too. So what are some tactics that you think are helpful in kind of coming up against that resistance and beating it out?
A big stick.
Yes.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is, what do I need to let go of in order to move forward? Is it letting go of the old computer system that I really liked? Is it letting go of the job that I really loved that I just got laid off from? Is it letting go of the belief that a job has security? Is it letting go, what do I need to let go of to be able to move forward here? Because that's what's going to help you to do that reframe. You shift and widen the aperture and say, okay, I'm letting go of that so I can move forward in a positive way.
Yes.
And this is where one of the tips in the book is to consider the big move. I said it a second ago, I alluded to it. If you don't like the new boss at work, you can quit that job. There are lots of jobs. There's lots of options. Now, you may say, oh, but I like the security. I've worked there for 20 years. It's only a 10-minute commute. And I love where my desk is right by the window. Whatever your reasons are, once you've made that consideration and say, no, I'm choosing to stay here. Now you're in a much stronger place to be resilient and to move forward in a positive way because you're choosing to stay rather than just being a victim of everything that's happening at work.
Yes.
So even
it gives you more, I think in that sense, it almost gives you more agency because now you've like done your pro con list and you're like, you've made the decision, like, this is what wins out. This is the way we're going. It instills this sense of agency in you. Like, I chose this, even though you didn't choose the computer system but you're choosing to stay in that situation. And there's where it feels like you have some sense of control, even though you don't have control over the circumstances, you have control over you and how you move forward with it.
Yeah. It's that internal locus of control, that feeling that I can do something to make a difference in my life here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's huge for resilience. Huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned a powerful question to ask to build confidence as you move through a change. Drop it.
Drop it. What if this goes well? So often that voice of doubt in our head is telling you everything that's going to go wrong and all the reasons why this is a bad idea. To talk to yourself rather than listening to yourself, you say, what if this goes well?
A lot of people, most people, I think, don't even think that. They're thinking most likely the worst case scenario on the other end of this.
And it has to be a conscious effort. The worst case scenario comes nice and easy. Right out there. You have to really engage that prefrontal cortex and say, okay, got it. That could all go wrong. Woohoo. What if this goes well? What if this goes right?
Yeah.
Because oftentimes the reality is going to be somewhere in the middle or more towards the good outcome.
Yeah.
And so, it gives us a lot, at least we might as well charge forward with positive confidence, thinking about what could go right. Obviously, we need to think about what could go wrong so we can mitigate that risk to the degree that we can. But so often this stuff that we're doing, it's walking into a networking event or applying for a job or, stuff that, mitigating risk is not that big a deal. As long as you got pants on, you're probably not going to get arrested and you're good, So
it's going to have a pretty decent outcome as long as those things are happening.
Cover your bits, you're good.
Right. It's interesting too, because I think too that when I think to like the growth mindset, I mean, it's kind of a similar thing, not necessarily like, what if this ends up being the best thing ever, but it's when we go through difficult challenges or we're facing change, and sometimes it's a big change, it's saying that like, this is happening, I'm going through this because for some reason on the other side, I'm going to be better at something. There's something in this for me. Now, my caveat to that is if you're in a situation, a big change that was forced upon you, like losing a loved one, give yourself some time and don't try to tell yourself right at the beginning that like, I'm going to grow from this.
Yeah.
Just survive, just make it through to through that beginning stages.
Take a minute and acknowledge those emotions, more than a minute. It's one of those things. This sucks. And eventually it'll be good. But right now it's not. And I'm going to go punch a couch pillow because I don't like this at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's okay. It's more than okay. It's necessary.
Yeah.
To process those emotions so that you can turn and widen the aperture. Because when you're clenching the emotions so they don't come flying out of your body, you can't really look around and do anything because you're just so like trying to hold on to everything so tight.
Yes. And I think that brings to kind of point that I think every change with it kind of comes a timeline of when that change is going to occur. And you're going to know intuitively when that process starts, if you have control over that part of it. But just listen to your body, I think, and listen to what, just meet yourself where you are. Right now, this just happened and I am grieving and I am literally just trying to get myself out of bed and move and function in my day-to-day life. Just be there, just survive that. And then over time, you are going to start to feel that little spark of like, okay, I can take on another little step and another little step.
And I think your point, your word little is such a good one to use, because so often we feel like we need to make these big, giant, colossal moves or these big, giant, colossal fixes that are going to fix everything and everything's going to be okay. and so often it's the small little things that we do that make all the difference. It's the little steps that move us forward. It's that relentless forward progress.
Yes.
That just little steps. And they're going to be steps backwards. Welcome to life.
Yeah.
But I think that recognizing it doesn't have to be a huge step.
Yeah.
The little steps over time are going to get you there. But if you're at least moving and at least acting on whatever's going on, even if it's to stop, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to cry. I'm taking the rest of the day off. I'm going to play video games and I'm going to cry and watch sad movies. That's an action. Moving through that. And that action, again, increases that agency to make us feel like, all right, there's something I can do here.
Yes. So two of the tips that I loved most around this in your book were tip number 19 and tip number 20. Break it up in one bite at a time.
Yeah. Yes.
I love this because I think the smaller we break the pieces up, and it makes those small wins possible. You start to gain the motivation. Every little small win you get, you're like, okay, I can do this. And then just that one little bite at a time. Don't try to overhaul or do all of the change tomorrow.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to end up on the couch crying, watching Netflix, eating Ben and Jerry's or whatever your favorite ice cream is, because you are the failure at life.
Right. Well, and that's totally true. When we fail at these giant leaps, thinking that that's what everybody's doing, that's what we need to do, we lose motivation and we feel like we're backsliding the whole time. And it's just taking those little clawing steps to continue forward momentum.
Yes. And another tip, I think we kind of maybe touched on this a little bit, but I was going to bring it back up. Relax. It's not all changing. I think this is so powerful. So I mean, reading through, I'm like, bookmark that, because I think we don't ever look at what is not changing. So like this change seems so big and like it's going to change our whole entire lives. But then when you stop and you look and you're like, but I'm still going to live in the same house and I'm still going to live in the same city and I'm still going to have the same group of friends. I'm still going to drive the same car. Like, what are the things that are stable? And ground into those.
Well, because when things are changing around us, we feel like the whole world is falling apart. Yeah. And so by being very conscious about saying, all right, what's not changing? What do I like in my life that is not currently changing? And it's funny in the workplace, as I found this in leadership, when things are changing in the workplace, oftentimes people jump to conclusions that there's all of these other things that are changing too. And so this is a great conversation to have at work too. If you're leading through change, talking specifically about what is not changing can settle people a little bit, but having that conversation with yourself is just as important.
Yeah, I think it's super imperative. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about, I think the guy that was being interviewed wrote The Psychology of Money, but he was referencing a story about Warren Buffett. He's like, you know how Warren Buffett does what he does? He doesn't focus on what might change. He doesn't try to predict. He focuses on what are the things that never change. And that is like, how do people react during a recession? That never changes. We do the same thing every time. And so that's where he puts all of his bets, all of his money into, is the things that are not going to change, that are going to stay static. And look where that got him. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind being Warren Buffett, but
I hear he's a really nice guy too.
He's very wise. I will say that.
He goes to McDonald's every day or something like that.
He does, which I think is a terrible decision, not the most wise decision. But you know what? I don't know, to each their own. There's people that have smoked for 80 years and never get lung cancer. So have at it. If that's what makes him happy and fills his cup, have your Big Mac.
Oh,
okay. So let's jump into now some other resilience building tactics that people can use to persevere through change.
Well, one of the things I think along the lines of having to make big shifts and feeling like you have to make big moves, also the belief that it's never gonna, you have to do it perfectly all the time. That everything has to be well thought out and you have to make sure that it's gonna be right all the time. This is why I call it dancing in the discomfort zone. Because when we start acting within change and we don't know, there's so many unknowns, we don't know what's gonna happen, things aren't gonna go the way you expect. Things aren't always gonna go right. And oftentimes you can't even see the path that you wanna follow to get to your new comfort zone. And so you just kind of have to look down in the midst of the fog and the dark and see the first step, take that first step, see what happens, and then bob and weave. And I think that's a really important thing as you start acting through change, is letting go. We talk about letting go of the thought that this is going to be perfect and everything's going to go the way I expect it to.
Yes.
Because it's not.
Yeah. It's having expectations on an outcome is the number one way to set yourself up for disappointment, because when we talk about what's in our control and what's not in our control, in that scenario of here's point A and here's point B, if you set an expectation for point B, there is so much not in your control in that middle portion. We'd like to think that it is, but it's not. So I think it's great to say this is the outcome that I would desire, but being detached from that. So if it doesn't go that direction, or you don't necessarily get that outcome, it's not a failure. It's just a different outcome.
Yeah. When I was, humans don't like unknowns. It's again, that brain trying to keep you alive. Yeah. And I was recently doing a leadership workshop with a group out in San Diego, and we were doing this exercise. It's a communication exercise. And at first it is so confusing and so disorienting, and every single group always figures it out. But at first it knocks you off your pedestal. And one of the guys at one point was like, all right, guys, hold on. This is all going to make sense eventually. We just have to communicate right now. And it was that quote was such a good one. It'll all make sense eventually.
Yes.
It's okay right now. If it's not going the way you think, it'll all, and you might end up in a different location, and that'll work out too,
Yep.
We underestimate our ability to figure things out along the way. And so go back to that list that we talked about earlier, where you're like, all right, I've figured things out. I can do this too.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even so, I'm in Tucson now, and I think it's great that you used to live here. I still haven't been to the museum that you worked at. Sidebar. I'll have to make it at some point, but
oh my God,
super interesting. I had no idea at the beginning of this year that I was going to end up in Tucson. Not even the faintest. Went to Colorado to help take care of my dad. He passed unexpectedly far earlier than we thought was going to happen. And then it was like, oh, here I am in Colorado. And the thing that I'm here for is no longer here. And so now what? And it was just like, okay, let's just figure out where we wanted to go. Started kind of reaching out to friends. Knew that I did not want to go back to the Pacific Northwest where it was gloomy and dark and rainy all the time. I'm like, I need sunshine. I need warmth. So my friend that lived in Tucson, she's like, well, Tucson, she's like, I wouldn't say warmth. I would say like, I don't know, hell hot, for at least during the summer. She's like, but we get a ton of sunshine. So there's that. So I was like, oh, okay, here we go. We're going to Tucson. I had no idea where I was going to live, where I was going to work, none of it. It was like, you know what? I'm just going to figure it out as I go. Just keep moving forward. And if it's not meant to work out, I have this like belief for me that I'm like, what's meant for me will not miss me. And it's like, whatever way I'm supposed to end up going, I'll figure it out. I will figure it out. I'm a smart chick. I got this, right? Yeah. Here we are, almost 4 months later in Tucson, job, living in my sweet little apartment. Who would have known? But this is not the outcome that I saw in February of this year whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's such an important thing to understand, is that there is going to be that period of discomfort, that middle, that part where it's like,
oh shit, was more like it.
And understand that that's part of the process, and it's okay to feel unsettled, and it's okay to feel like a little bit like, what's going on? Because you're trying to figure it out. You're dancing in the discomfort zone. Like it's uncomfortable. And I think so many people, again, we go back to the comfort thing, where so many people think that everything should be figured out and I should be comfortable and happy all the time. And unfortunately, that keeps us from that happiness, because we aren't willing to go and say, this is uncomfortable.
Yes.
I don't know what to do right now. I don't like this.
Okay. So other tactics to persevere through change.
Well, we already talked about the small steps. We talked about, I think, looking back, one of the big things I talk about at the end of my keynote, because the persevering is the hardest part, as we're trying to get past that unsettled, unknown, part where we're just trying to figure it out and we're dancing. I think looking back every once in a while at how far you've come and all the things you've figured out and all the things you've overcome is really important for continued forward progress. Because it's so easy, especially when you're going for a big goal or you're trying to overcome a big change, it's so hard to feel like you're not getting anywhere, and you're just, every step forward is 2 steps back. Yeah. And so by stopping for a minute, and I do this a lot with my business, I've been in business for 8 years, and I still, every once in a while, I'm like, oh, I'm not where I need to be. But I look back and I'm like, holy crap, 365 days ago, I was in a completely different place. Yeah. I doubled my income. I, increased this, I increased this. And it's like, oh, all right, we're doing okay. You start to realize all those little daily steps actually got you really, really far.
Yes.
So I think that's a really important part of perseverance, is stopping every once in a while and making a list of all the stuff that you just did that. Yeah. Like, hell yeah. Have a little celebration.
Celebrate those small wins. Another tip from your book around the plan section anyway, was time to lighten your load. And I loved what you had to say in this, because I think so important, especially when you're going through like big upheaval life changes. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yep. There's such, just like alcohol culture in this country is so, so prevalent. There's such a hustle. There's so much hustle porn out there. Like, so busy. I'm so busy. I'm doing this side hustle. I'm doing this and I'm doing this. And when you're persevering through a tough change and you're unsettled and you're uncomfortable and you have tons of unknowns and you're making lots of decisions and lots of little moves and you're really uncomfortable, sometimes it's best to say, okay, cool. What can I not do? What can I say no to? How can I simplify my life so I can focus on this? Because this is hard. This last week, I had a tough week. And at the end of the week, I was supposed to go paddling with somebody on Friday night and go to dinner and do all this stuff. I called him up and I said, I am so sorry, but I need to just lay around and be a lump of goo tonight. I need to watch TV and not be social and not be. I said, can I take a rain check? Because I'm not going to be very good company. But it was that giving myself permission to say no to things that I could say no to, because there are things, responsibilities that I can't say no to. But simplifying to the point that you're like, all right, I need to lighten my load right now. Yeah. I need to make things as easier as I can. And a lot of times that's saying, what's good enough? Yes. What's good enough right here? Okay. So my house isn't perfectly clean. Okay. That's fine. One time I was babysitting for my nephew and my 2 nieces, and he was like 2 or 3, and they were 7 and 8. And I was babysitting for the whole weekend. I don't have children myself. So I was like, how can I leave my alone right now? This is very unsettling. And when nephew comes out, we're about to go grocery shopping or something. He comes out with like his shirt's on backwards and his pants are backwards. He got 2 different shoes on. He looks like a complete disaster. And I looked at him and I was like, pick your battles, Ann. I think it's time. That's good enough. Let's go. He's legal. He's not going to be cold.
Yep.
Let's go.
Good enough.
It's like, what's good enough right now?
Yes.
To say, I'm going to let this be. I'm going to give this permission to not be perfect right now, because I need to. I need to focus
love
my
that
emotional energy on dealing with this other stuff.
And even some of the tips that you brought up in your book too, like, doing the meal kits or whatever that come in. So you don't have to think about creating a grocery list and doing the cooking. And I mean, you do have to do some cooking with those, but it's like very minimal. It's like pretty much done for you kind of thing.
It's all measured out and it's great.
But it's like it is so time and so much energy to think of a grocery list or come up with a meal plan and then put it all together and then do the meal prep, blah, like just order meal kits. And how much time do you now give yourself to focus on that change or just to even be with that change? Yep. If you have the financial capacity to do it, have somebody come clean your house. All these little things that you think of. And I think, a good tactic could be like writing down a typical day for you, like what you did the whole day through, and then look at that and say, like, where are the places that I can ask for help? Where are the places that I can take this time so that I can give it back to myself as I navigate this? Hire a dog walker to take your dog out for a walk so that you can get that 30 minutes of like not hearing the squeak toy go off every 30 seconds. So you can get that quietude to process all of your change. That makes a ton of sense. I think as far as, like if we go now into the perseverance part, right? So like we've done the plan and now we're just persevering through the change. So these were the takeaways that hit home with me. Please add any that you think are super helpful to our listeners. This one is always hard for me to accept and practice, but it's so true. Just worry about today. We get so focused on like
the past and worrying about tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it's, somebody said this to me once and I was like, that's baloney. I don't know what you're talking about. And then one day it like suddenly dawned on me. She was like, every once in a while, just stop and realize that in this moment right now, everything is fine. Everything is perfect. And it's like, yeah, but I'm worried about money. Yeah, but that's in the future. In this moment right now, I'm safe. I'm not hungry. I got a roof over my head. Like I'm not drowning. Like in this moment.
Life is pretty copacetic.
In this moment. And you stop and just keep saying, no. In this exact moment. In this exact moment. Yes, I'm worried about things. Yes. And in this exact moment.
Yeah.
Everything is perfect.
Yep.
And we're so not used to, because we're always thinking ahead. Yep. We're always thinking in the past, but it's like, be here now and worry about what can I do right now?
Right now. Yeah.
There's a million other things I can do, but I'm not going to do them today. What am I going to do today?
Yes.
And yeah, it's a
big one. And it's, my coach always gives me the best, like her mantra, what she's always saying to me. She's like, just be present in the moment and think to yourself, what's the next best choice I can make right now? And she's like, because that moment in time, being in the present, that's the only time that you can actually control. You can't control the future, can't control the past. So get right into that moment, be in it, say, I'm okay. What's the next best choice that I can make? And listen to that intuition.
Right. And I can't control the future, but I can impact it by doing something now. And this goes back to what we were talking about little moves.
Yes.
Yes, we want to make $100,000 next year, and I can't do that right now.
Yeah.
But I can look in my CRM and reach out to 5 past clients. Great. Yep. That's the next best thing that I can do right now to get me to this place that I want to get.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when you're dealing with change, it's the same thing. When you're dealing with something that you don't want to have to deal with, I just got laid off. Well, okay, cool. I can't change that. Yep. Yes, I'm hurt. Yes, I'm, and I can't change that. What I can do is set a timer for 10 minutes, jump on Indeed and go search for one job function. Let me just do that right now.
You just led me right into my next tactic that I wanted to bring up, which is the 10-minute rule.
Oh, it's my favorite rule of most rules. Right now, I'm sure there's one that I like better, but
I've never tried this, but when I read it, I was like, that's freaking genius.
Something you don't want to do. And especially when we're dealing with tough change. Okay. So right now, one of the things I have on my to-do list, it's been on my to-do list for a frightening amount of time, is to finish this trademark. One of the taglines in my keynote is "Punch it, Margaret." It's a story about my grandmother. It's hilarious, but it's this like, take action, do the thing, punch it, Margaret, go. But I have to finish the trademark on this. So, because I've got the trademark in process, but I got to finish it. So the 10-minute rule says when you got something you don't want to do, funeral plans, or, looking for a job, or finishing your trademark, whatever, set the timer for 10 minutes, maybe even 8 minutes, and start the thing. And when the timer goes off, if you are still in resistance and you still hate it and you still are like, oh, this is terrible, you can stop. You got 8 minutes or 10 minutes farther than you were before, and you'll pick it up again later. But 99 out of 100 times, and I think I've only done this 99 times, so it's worked every single time. When the timer goes off, you have momentum, you're started, and you keep going. Yeah. Rarely have I actually stopped when the timer goes off. I'm like, nah, I'm good. Because it's the activation energy that's required to get it started. It's that punch it, Margaret, get it started, get it going. And then you realize, oh, this isn't so bad. Let me go ahead and finish this.
Yeah. I tend to find that mood follows action. So whenever you take that action, the mood is going to come in right behind that. I had just never heard of the 10-minute rule, which is, I just think it's brilliant because it's like, it gets you like in the mentality of like, well, anybody can do anything for 10 minutes, right? Like I can do this for 10 minutes. And then you're right. It shifts into action mode, into forward progress. Your brain clicks in and says, oh, we're moving forward. Cool. And then you catch on and you keep going.
And again, give yourself permission that legitimately when that timer goes off, if you're still suffering, good to go. Quit, stop, move on to something else.
Yep.
At least you got 10 minutes done. Do 10 more minutes later.
100%. And I think in this too was tied in, eat the frog first. I did not write that one down because I've heard it. It's something I've heard elsewhere, but I think it ties in really well to this.
Yep. Brian Tracy wrote a book called Eat That Frog. And basically his premise is, and I think this was a Mark Twain quote. I think Mark Twain said, if you have to eat a live frog, don't stare at it too long. Right. And so Brian Tracy's point is, from a productivity standpoint, there's something you don't need to do it first. Do the worst first. Eat your frog first thing in the morning. Not only is that frog no longer staring at you from your to-do list, but it also creates that momentum of, oh, I just got that out of the way. Let me go ahead and do this. Let me go ahead and do this. And you start increasing your productivity because you had a big win right up front. So figure out, what is that frog task that you don't want to do, whether it's, regarding a change or regarding some unknown or whatever. What's the thing you don't want to do? And say, all right, I'm going to tackle that first thing tomorrow morning.
So just wondering what your stance or like what your practice is on this. So, you hear a lot of talk these days about morning routines and how important a morning routine is to get you into the mindset, to get you in and just putting you first and your self-care first. I do a morning routine. It is very much around self-care. But then there's the other side of things where the productivity people are like, fuck your morning routine. Get up, go straight to work when you're fresh, when it's like on the top of your mind, you're eating the frog first, like you're getting into the depths of it right off the bat. And then maybe have your mid-afternoon routine. Once you've nailed out all your projects or done these things, that's when you go and have your morning routine, but mid-afternoon or at the end of the day or whatever. What say you?
Oh, I'm sitting here saying to myself, do I be honest? Do I be honest about this? Or do I say the honest answer is I have heard that I am like the farthest from a routine person that exists on the planet. And I've read so much about the benefits of morning routines that I have tried so hard to create a morning routine. And I was successful for a while. Did I think it really helped? I don't know. I don't think so. My morning routine now, what gets me out of bed, and this is why I'm so happy with daylight savings time. I know, really unpopular opinion, but The sun is now coming up at 6:30 instead of 7:30, and I live right on Tampa Bay. So I can go out in my yard and watch the sunrise.
Love it.
Which is my morning routine where I do a little gratitude. I do a little like, you know, every time that you see a sunrise, it's like, it's a new
day. There is something about sunrise. It's like fresh start. It's a new beginning. I get to start over.
So I think you have to kind of design the morning routine for you and figure out what works for you. Because that discipline of, you know, first I sit down and journal, and then I go and exercise. I come back and shower. I have breakfast, and then I do meditation, and then I get to work. That was my morning routine for a year or so. But I also travel so much that it's hard to keep that going and yada, yada,
yes.
blah, blah. So,
and schedules conflict sometimes. You've got to fit stuff in different times.
Totally.
The other thing that I kind of noticed is like, if I have all these things that I do as part of my morning routine, by the time I get to working, I'm like, I have already had a day.
I'm exhausted.
And it's just my morning routine. Now I got to actually like do work. Because by that point it's like 9 o'clock, but I've been up since 4:30, and it's like, what the hell have I been doing for the last 4.5 hours? Like, okay.
I think the key is, and this is the key with any strategy that is highly recommended, is you got to figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
You know, you got to figure out what the right answer is for you when it comes to change, when it comes to your morning routine, when it comes to all these things. If I had noticed a significant difference in my productivity when I was sticking to that get up, journal, exercise, shower, you know, when I was sticking to that morning routine, if I had noticed a significant difference when I stopped, I would have been like, okay, I got to get back to that. But I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I'm figuring out the one thing that I do know works for me for morning routine is doing tomorrow's planning today.
Yes.
So at the end of each day, when I'm leaving my office, I look at tomorrow's to-do list. I look at tomorrow's schedule. What do I have to do? And I look at, okay, what's the frog? What am I going to do first thing when I get to work, whenever that is? And that helps me to know when I'm getting to work, what I'm going to do when I get there. And that does help my productivity in a big way. So I know, hey, I can draw out my morning, whatever routine I'm going to do a little bit longer.
My morning shenanigans.
Yeah, exactly. Or, hey, sit your butt down as soon as you get up and start getting that thing in, because you want to get it in their inbox before they get to their desk or whatever, you know, it's figuring out what works for you. And that's the greatest and the hardest part about being human, about being an entrepreneur, is that we're all so different that all of the recommendations can be baloney for you.
Yes.
Because you work differently and you're wired differently. And so give yourself permission to figure out what works for you, even if the person beside you is being really loud about what works for them.
Yes. What's right for one person isn't right for everybody. And, you know, I will say, like, on the days when I'm doing my entrepreneur duties, like, meditation's cool. I think it's good to get into like that present state of mind, whatever, but do I necessarily feel a shift in myself when I'm doing my work? No, not so much. Now, the days that I go and I work in healthcare, if I don't meditate and do breath work before I go into that noise, it is like catastrophe from the moment you walk in. So it's like, I've got to come in from this like Zen, like a place of equanimity where it's like, everything is good, all is equal. Otherwise it's going to be just bad from the word go. So it's almost like you have to adjust your morning routines or your practices based on what you know is going to be on your schedule. Or maybe it's a difficult client who, like, you've been working with them for 15 weeks and they still don't get what you're trying. It's like, I know I'm going to be frustrated, so I need to bring myself into like that calm state before I even go into that with them. So I think it's definitely something to kind of hone and figure out and be able to be fluid with it and adjust it as needed.
And not only fluid with it on a case by case basis, but on a month by month basis, you know, and allowing yourself to evolve. Man, being human is hard, man.
It is,
you know, because we're always changing and this goes back to exactly what we're talking about here is this. One of the things I've been toying around with as I think about 2024 and what my messaging is and what I want it to be. One of the things I'm playing with is an expect change message. Expect things to change. Expect yourself to change. Expect yourself to evolve. Expect relationships to change. Expect jobs to change. You know, I mean, the more we expect that, the less we get stuck on thinking that we are a certain way, or that the job's always going to be a certain way, or that the industry is always going to be a certain way. You know, Yeah. So
yeah,
expect it.
I think that the more that we get comfortable with, and I know this is going to come across as like, oh yeah, right, good luck with that. The more we get uncomfortable or get comfortable with uncertainty, the more that we get comfortable with impermanence. Nothing is forever. Nothing is forever. And the more that we get comfortable going through the transformation process.
Well, and is the transformation process even a process? Because it's what we're constantly doing.
Life is one big transition, and it's absurd. It is absolutely absurd. Okay. But that's what it is. And now we come to the Buddhist principle of acceptance.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I think we have to get more comfortable with it.
To me, I don't know if it is, but like somebody said, you never step in the same river twice.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, and you think about that and you're like, what are you talking about? It's the same river, right? No. The water's always moving. The dirt's always moving. The fish are always moving. The algae's always moving. Like the leaves are going down. It's never the same river twice.
It's so true. It is so true. And I think about that too, that it's with us in our bodies, right? I think if we our cells regenerate like every 7 minutes or something like that. So really, as much as we think we're the same, like minute to minute, we're actually not. Like we're a whole different person every 7 minutes that you go through life, and you don't notice that change, but it's happening. Mm-hmm. So is aging. Yep. You can't control aging. It's a change that happens on a daily basis. Yep. Of course, there's certain ages that you get to, and it's like every morning a new damn wrinkle. Really? What is this? Yeah. Oh, my back. Oh, this morning it's my knee. Yeah. That's fun. That's the fun part. But I want to kind of touch on too, because I think one of the harder parts of change is when there is an identity shift that has to happen, or the loss of an identity. That tends to be, at least has been for me in my experience, the harder changes to navigate, because there's almost like this inherent grief process that comes along with the loss of an identity. And then who do I become on the other side of this if that part of me is gone? And this could be through divorce. I'm no longer someone's wife or a wife. It could be
nester.
I'm no longer a daughter because you've lost a parent. I'm no longer a parent to at-home kids, or that they've crossed the threshold, hopefully. But I think it's or like even in us changing careers, we identified with this career that we did for so long. And then now it's like to switch over to be an entrepreneur is this huge identity shift that brings up a whole lot of stuff. How do we navigate that?
My parents' basement at 42 years old, 3 months having left my big fat corporate career.
Oh, girl. Literally same age every saying,
oh crap, who am I now? I'm nobody.
Yeah. It is a scary, scary, scary thing. Yep. Thank God for the parents that were willing to take us in our 40s and be like, okay, honey,
here we go again.
You got some time to figure this out, but not too long.
Not much.
Yeah. But I think it's hard. So how, since you've been through, I know you've been through divorce as well, which is a huge identity shift. So what do you think has worked for you in those scenarios?
I think it's giving yourself permission. I think it's making there's so many pieces to this, like 8,000 things are hitting me in my brain. I think a big one is giving yourself permission to be somebody other than who you thought you would always be. It's that letting go that we talked about at the beginning of the episode. You have to let go of, I am, a big fat New York corporate corner office, person. I have to let go of that being part of my identity. We talked about the drinking. I have to let go of me being the life of the party because I can keep up with the drinking and keep up with everybody. I can be the life of the party completely sober. Oh, I can do stupid stuff even when I am not drinking. And it's letting go and stepping into, what does it mean if I'm not this anymore? Mm. And doing a little mental exercise of, who am I? Because I'm not that anymore. Yeah. And really looking at, who am I and who do I want to be? And it's as terrifying and awful and unsettling as it is, it's also an exciting moment to say, this is an opportunity for me to shift, to head in a different direction.
To take on an identity that I've always wanted to have.
And the uncertainty is just one of the joyful additions to the terror that will hit you every day. And every once in a while, when you look back and you're like, oh, look what I did. You know, I mean, a year and a half ago, I moved down. I was chasing the sun just like you, you know, and I moved down here and it worked out beautifully, but I didn't know anybody. I didn't know what I was walking into. And was I the person that lived near my mom and the person that was there for my nieces? And now I'm this single redheaded person in a strange land. You know, so it's looking at what do I need to let go of, and who am I if I'm not those things? Because you're a ton of stuff. You just need to reorient the priorities.
Yeah. Which I think speaks to like the term self-complexity of having these multifacets to ourself. And there's been a ton of research into this, that people who are have more self-complexity have higher levels of resilience because they have that fluidity in their identity, that it's like, oh, okay, well, that thing may be gone. Now I can shift into this new thing, or I can become more of this thing that I already identify with. It's always having like these different, for lack of a better metaphor, rooms in the house that we can go to. So when one goes away or it's being remodeled, we can always go to this other room in our house and live in that. And we've cultivated that.
Yep. Well, and it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with agency. I feel like I can make stuff happen. I feel like there's something I can do here.
Yeah.
It's not just, whoa, I'm nobody now. You know, like it's saying, oh, well, I got other hats. I can do other things.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
So the last tip that I want to bring up, because I feel like this is a really beautiful foundation for anybody who's going through any kind of change. So this came in tip number 42, don't get hangry. Focusing on the things in our lives that we cannot let go by the wayside as we go through change.
Everything that we're talking about since the beginning of this episode takes emotional energy. It takes emotional intelligence. It takes patience. It takes pause and thought and all that stuff, which is hard, especially when you are hangry. Now, I don't specifically mean when you haven't eaten, though that's a big one. But every decision you make, like, okay, so backing up, if you think about emotional energy, and every morning you wake up from a full night's sleep, hopefully, with 100 units. Yeah, right. Fingers crossed. With 100 units of emotional energy. Okay. And every decision you make and every piece of willpower that you exert and everything you do that's even a little bit stressful eats away at that emotional energy. And that feeling of hanger is when you're out. And that feeling of hanger, again, isn't always related to food. Sometimes I just want to strangle somebody in a meeting, or I just want to cry or pound on the desk or
throw a Slurpee at somebody.
Throw a Slurpee at somebody or pour a Slurpee over my own head, whatever the case. But that's when you're out of emotional energy. And it's almost impossible to act in a calm, rational manner, to make tough decisions, to eat the right things, to make the right decisions, to, you know, be mature when you're at that zero emotional energy place. And so making sure, especially in these super stressful, unsure times where you're unsettled and you don't know what's happening and you're just stressed out, that you're doing things to give yourself a little buffer of emotional energy. So whether it's making sure you're drinking a lot of water, making sure you're maybe swapping out the fries for a salad, maybe you're having a walking meeting or taking a car nap. Somebody asked me recently as I was explaining the car nap, they were like, okay, the car's in park, right? I'm like, yeah, stop the car, put the car in park. Yes. But it's like, I get somewhere 10 minutes early. Great. I'm going to find a quiet tree to park under, set my timer on my phone for 8 minutes and just stop.
Yep.
That is going to just give me that little buffer of emotional energy. So whatever I have this afternoon is not quite as hard.
Yes.
You know, understanding that it's all connected, our ability to manage our emotions and our ability to make these tough decisions and deal with uncertainty and all of that is connected to hydration, nutrition, sleep, you know, have an escape. Yep. Every once in a while, if I'm halfway through the day and I'm like at the end of my rope, I'm like, all right, go out there, get on your paddleboard, go around the bay, and then come back. You know, maybe it's just a 10-minute paddle, but that little escape, getting away from it, gives me that buffer so I can make it through the rest of the day. that makes all the difference, especially when everything's piling up and is hard.
Absolutely.
Give yourself a break and figure out what you need to do to give yourself the emotional energy to make it through. Again, you might just make it through the next hour. You don't have to solve the world's problems here.
Just worry about today.
Just worry about this
start
next
with today. And I think that's so important, like the foundations of nutrition, of sleep, of hydration, taking care of our body. But I do love too, the mental aspect of it. If it's like, you're using so much mental energy and emotional energy as you navigate this new thing, that you have to give yourself spaces in the day to like refill that cup.
Yeah.
Don't let it get down to the E where you're just like frantic and I can't deal with this. It's like, find the 10-minute car naps, go out for a walk for 10 minutes, meditate. For me, that's a great bring it back down sort of thing. For some people, it's reading, whatever your thing is that brings you that peace, that calm, and recharges you. Like, schedule it into your day whenever possible, especially if you're in like the throes of a really, really big change. I think that was a fantastic tip. Wonderful advice.
And to your point, it doesn't have to be big. You don't have to eat kale 3 times a day. You don't have to spend 2 hours in the gym. It's little stuff just to get you through the day.
Yes.
That's the key. It can be little. Take 5 breaths. Maybe that's all it is, but it makes a giant difference.
Yes. And I think it was you in the book, you were talking about like before you go into confrontation, or this may have been in one of your podcast episodes that I listened to, when you're going into like what you know is going to be a stressful situation, whether that be like confrontation with a coworker, with your boss, like before you go into it, you're like, I just got to use the bathroom really quick to go in and just be like, have that moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to breathe. I'm going to collect. I'm going to recharge that cup. I'm going to come at this from a really whole, calm place. I think that was a fantastic idea, because nobody's going to tell you, no, you can't go to the bathroom.
Totally. And that's especially helpful in the middle of that meeting when everything's, everybody's getting super stressed and tears are starting to go down your face, or they're starting to grip the edge of the table. So, you know what? This is a really important meeting, and I know we have to finish this. I have to pee so bad. I am so sorry. Nobody's going to say, no, you pee right now in that seat. We're finishing this conversation. People might roll their eyes, but I don't care. I get a minute to compose myself. They get a minute. And you doing that probably benefits everybody else in the room, because once you come back calm, like we know this, our nervous system's attuned to the nervous systems around us. And if you come back calm, that helps everybody else to come back down to regulation again. So you're actually doing everybody a favor, even though, no, it's just purely a favor. There's no downside to that, I don't think. Yep.
So I'm kind of curious too, of why I always wonder why people pick the niches or the topics or their areas of interest. And so what was it in life maybe or what brought you to being like, I'm going to talk about change?
When I came home from 2nd grade in spring, my parents sat my brother and I down and they said, we're moving to Saudi Arabia. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means, but we've already moved a couple times, so I'm cool with it. And we ended up moving to Saudi Arabia. We moved to Egypt 2 years later. We moved to Greece a year later. And having grown up with that kind of change and that kind of discomfort, moving to countries that are completely different culture, completely different language, I got good at change. And I realized that in my adulthood, as I continued to, and my lifestyle, my gypsy lifestyle is not one that most people would want. And that's absolutely fine.
Yes.
But I think there is a level of comfort with discomfort that I have, that I can lend a new voice to this. Let's get a little more comfortable being uncomfortable so that we can thrive, so that we can do the things that we really need to move forward in our lives. Yeah. So I think I have a unique perspective on change and on discomfort that brings a new voice.
Yeah. Because it sounds like too, like those experiences as a child really kind of like primed you almost, because you did go through several more pretty big changes in adulthood. And you feel like the skills that you learned in childhood and probably adolescence growing up, those are the skills that helped you to navigate these big changes as an adult.
Yeah. And to have that perspective that unknowns aren't always bad. And that people, I also have a fundamental belief that people are good. and that they're generally around me and they'll help me if I need it, which is a really nice outlook to have when things are unknown and unsettled. I mean, I'm not like asking people on the train to hold my purse as the doors open, and I'm not walking down dark alleys in the middle of the night, but having that belief that, and proof from my experience running around the world in Muslim countries and European countries, and that people are good and they're there to that things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
Is a nice perspective to have too.
Yeah, absolutely. Going into it, believing that people have good intention is always a good perspective to take, I think.
Well, and when we're dealing with change, one of the biggest strategies that you and I haven't touched on at all is the fact that we don't have to do it alone.
Yes.
Humans have a fundamental need to belong. We need to have a tribe, because when our brains were invented, if we didn't have a tribe, we weren't going to make it.
Yep.
There was no DoorDash. There was no
DoorDash, come help me with my problem.
Come to my cave. And right.
Although that would be fantastic, dial a friend.
Yeah, right. And so knowing that the people around you aren't all enemies, and knowing I've also got a phenomenal family that I've always had the comfort of being able to fall back on if I needed to, which really helps. But that you don't have to do it alone. There's always somebody that can help you. There's always somebody that you can just reach out to, even if it's in a book or on a podcast.
Yep.
There's always another voice that can help you through whatever you're dealing with.
Absolutely. Great point to make and to wrap up with, because that is very much, a big part of well-being is being with other humans, doing this life together, navigating the hard things together. I think there's a ton of resources out there, your friends, your family. If you don't feel like you have resources in those two areas, coaches are another great, removed from the whole situation. So they're not there for the story or the drama. They're there to help you make progress to the next
have their own perspective on it. Yeah. Right.
Yes. So I think there's a ton of resources, and I'll be sure to put some in the show notes too, for anybody that's seeking kind of that support system, that group to look into to help them navigate change. And it has been, I knew going into this that this was going to be so much fun, just from like the first time I met you and then listening to your podcast. And like, there is so much like vibrancy. So thank you very much for taking the time today to come and talk and share all of your wisdom around change. I think that you bring some incredible points to the forefront that a lot of people, I think, need to hear, especially as we are in this kind of really rocky time of change and just society and the world in general. So if our listeners want to learn more about you, about your book, which is 47 tips on how to navigate change.
There's two of them actually. Okay. Hey, but thank you for having me. This has been super, super fun. I always love talking about this. People want more from me. yourchangespeaker.com is my website. Your Change Speaker. It's nice and easy. Podcast is Dancing in the Discomfort Zone. I think we're on episode 250 something. So there's all kinds of dances you can get yourself into it. Go deep in. And the book you're referencing is Get Over It, with 47 tips on overcoming the discomfort of change. There's also Get Them Over It, which is for managers and leaders leading people through change, which is the second one. That's 57 tips, because for one a week is not, because we need all the help we can get.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And like I said, when I told you that, before we jumped on, that I'd read Get Over It. And I'm like, I love that it's so concise, because it's one of those that you can go back to very easily and find the thing that's going to get you through that sticky spot. Or if you keep, missing the mark on a certain step of the change cycle, you can go back and look at that and be like, okay, here, how do I navigate this? Like, what are the tools that I can do this? It's great. It'd be a great bathroom read too.
Well, and that's exactly what I always tell people, is like, leave it on the back of your toilet, because sometimes that's the only time you get some peace and quiet, and it's written in tip format. So you read 1 or 2 tips, you marinate on those for the rest of the day. And at least you read something, if you didn't have time to sit down and read a couple chapters.
So great. Well, I definitely hope everybody reads your books, listens to your podcast, because I know I've enjoyed all of them so much. So thanks again for coming. And I'm sure at some point our paths may cross again, and we can do another podcast episode around another lovely topic.
Absolutely. I've got plenty up my sleeve, but this has been great. Thanks so much, Kristen. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.